Okay, mirase. Okay, so your GMO greetings. For those who are unaware, I'm Odwirafo Kwesi Radne Mbata Akan, Odwirafo of Nkwamua Maruka TV Movie Akwamu Nation in North America within Odwiraman, the purified nation, Afuraka, Afuraitkait people, meaning African Black people in the Western Hemisphere. So today we want to touch on a specific and important aspect of our ancestral cultural cosmology, dealing with the female Abosom, the female Ntorot, the female divinity, Bast, and her role in cosmology in the context of fidelity in relationships. And we're talking about relationship fidelity. And you see we mentioned stable heart meditation, and we're going to show why we specifically titled it that. So this is the animal totem, the Mau, which is the title for cat in the language of ancient Kemet. In the Akan language as well of Ghana and Ivory Coast, we say meow for cat. That's a title for cat, as well as okra. Okra is a title for cat, as well as meow. Okra also is the term for soul, divine consciousness, and so forth. And the cat is associated with the purity of the soul. You see the cat or the okra constantly cleaning itself, licking its fur, and so forth, always making sure that it's pure, and the soul, the okra, the divine consciousness, is such, pure as well. So there's an association between the kra, soul, and kra, the cat, the purified, entity. So this is her sacred animal totem. Now, let's get into and let's show the reason why we have this image of the heart. And we're going to go directly to one of our articles that we published a while back on our Oji.sim page, our WordPress blog page. So we did a 6-part series on the female divinity, the female Abosom. The term Abosom in the Akan language means deity, goddess, or god, spirit, force in creation. There are male forces in creation, in nature, and female Abosom, and so forth. We did a 6-part series on the divinity, Bast. And in this particular context, we were focusing on fidelity and relationship. We're going to touch on a few of those parts of the series. So now let's get straight to a certain aspect of it. When we talk about here, now first we were talking about the relationship between Het Heru and Bast. Het Heru, and I'll give you an image of Het Heru real quick. All right, so this right here, let me just switch it over real quick, just so you can see this if you're unfamiliar with this specific divinity. Okay, so that is an image of Het Heru, the female divinity of sensuality and creativity, and very often people say love and so forth. She is Het Heru in ancient Kemet. We pronounce her name as Che in Akan. She's also called Afi or Afia or Afua in Akan. And females who are born on Fida, which is Friday, that's an indication they were assigned to this force in creation pre-incarnation. So they were born on her day, and they are called Afia or Afua. So if you know somebody named Afua, that means that they were born under the energy of the divinity Afi or Afua. She's also called Cheche. The planet Afi, so-called Venus, is her shrine within our solar system and so forth, and she governs the fallopian tubes and all of that. But people are aware of her in the Yoruba tradition. She's called Oshun, and in Vodun she's called Erzuli or Azili and so forth. So people are aware of Het Heru, Het Heru as far as attraction, the central attraction, that the precursor to the fusion of the complementary opposites of male and female, and that sensory or central attraction that draws us together initially, and also the fusion of the sperm and ovum inside the fallopian tubes in the shrine of Het Heru. Let's just show her symbolism quickly. That's, of course, her planet, Afi, Cheche. Some of the symbols associated with her. You'll see this is actually the star and the, moon and so forth, but that star is Cheche. These ancient sculptures, so-called bird sculptures in ancient Kemet, the sacred feminine divinity sculptures, these are symbols of Het Heru and so forth. But you'll see that she governs the fallopian tubes. Even her title, Het Heru, means the house, Het, of the hare, the falcon. But that is the fallopian tube structure, and this is where that comes from. And in fact, let me switch over really quickly to one of the other books I've published. So I've published to date 31 books. All of the ebook versions of my 31 books you can download for free from our website. One of them is talking about Tahuti Sankofa Fa Nifa, showing the male divinity of wisdom and the female divinity of wisdom in different traditions. But we also touch on Het Heru in this book as well. So it's important to know her function and then the relationship between her and Bast. So because we talk about those two between attraction and affection, so you need to know the difference. So we were showing the shrine of Het Heru, of course, is the fallopian tubes and so forth. This is her once again. Hold on one second. Let me switch screens so you can okay, so you should be able to see it now. So let me just scroll back up. So this is the book. Hold on a second. All right, so this is the book, Tahuti Sankofa Fa Nifa. And we're showing how Tahuti shows up in the Akan tradition, Yoruba tradition, Ewe and Fon tradition, as well as ancient Kemet, of course. The male divinity of wisdom. And we also talk about Seshat, the female divinity of divine wisdom, as well in the book. But there's a role with regard to Het Heru that's important. Okay, so that's Afi, or Cheche, her planet. This is a sculpture of Het Heru, the sacred totem of the sacred divine cow with the great horns and so forth, that you see her horns with the solar disk in the middle. And of course, these sacred cattle in East Afuraka. Afuraka is where it comes from. We show the relationship between Het Heru, one of her sacred forms, and the Sankofa symbol in the Akan tradition. This is the origin of that, a Ntorot symbol. And then you'll see the sacred cow once again. You'll see Het Heru has cow's ears. That's her sacred animal totem. The Sankofa symbol is a representation of that. And then you'll see the symbol of Het Heru, her shrine in the body, which is the, fallopian tubes. And you'll even see the face of the cow with the horns manifest through the fallopian tube structure as well. So you see the relationship between the sacred Ka'et, which is the term for cow in Akan, or in ancient Khanid and Kemet. Ka'et means cow, Ka means bull. The Ka'et also means soul, and Ka means soul on the masculine side. But the sacred Ka'et, or cow, is her sacred animal totem, as you can see. But you'll also see the fallopian tubes are her shrine in the body. It is the Het, or the house Het, a hare, the falcon, the sacred falcon flying through the sky and so forth, but that is the place where the sperm and ovum fuse together. And she's the one who brings us together initially, man and woman, then brings us together centrally for copulation, and then brings together the sperm and ovum for fusion as well. She fuses together complementary opposites in a balanced, harmonious fashion. So that takes place within her shrine, the Het Heru, or the fallopian tubes and so forth. And when you see these ancient pre-dynastic statues that they'll call the bird woman and so forth, these are representations of Het Heru. There's also a female divinity, Bat, who also is connected to the cow, Wakayat as well. But these are these ancient representations of Het Heru. So, let me switch back. And we just need to make that distinction clear because it's important with regard to her distinct role in cosmology in relationship to Bast. So as you can see, we say that Afi, which is Het Heru, she's a wanderer, traveler, adventurous, innovative, creative. She governs the sensual attraction, which is the precursor to sexual activity, procreative activity, and that which replenishes its harmony or pleasure. She governs the divine reproductive system, the procreative creative structure in Abadiye, which is creation, and the divine body of the supreme being, Inyamewa and Inyame, which is Aminet and Amen, and she governs the fallopian tubes and so forth. So, but let's get back to our WordPress article. So now that you have some background on Het Heru, also called Oshun and so forth, we say in part 2 of our series, the divinity, the Abosom, divinity Bast, often shown in her totemic form as the divine Mau or cat, works with Het Heru, with Afi, while the sensual attraction, which facilitates the fusion of complementary opposites, is the initiatory process. Initiatory process of relationship governed by Het Heru, so that magnetism, Het Heru is that magnetic force that, you know, you're attracted to, if you're an Afurakani man, African Black man, you're attracted to an Afuraitkait woman, an African Black woman. That capacity for us to be drawn to one another naturally in a harmonious, balanced fusion, that force is Het Heru that pulls us together. So that's the initiatory process of fusion. Now, that's governed by Het Heru, but the perpetuation of that fusion through affection is governed by Bast. So there's a difference between that attraction, that draw together, that fuses together, the Afurakani man, Afuraitkait woman, the, you know, the sperm and ovum and so forth that fuse together. The fusion is important because you have to fuse together things in complementary balance in a harmonious way so they can function properly and so forth. But then that fusion must be perpetuated. So the attraction is the initiatory process, that's attraction. Then affection is the perpetuation of the initiatory fusion, and that is governed by Bast. So Het Heru governs the attraction, Bast governs the perpetuation of that attraction, which is affection. Now, and that directly relates to fidelity. Now, we say the sacred vessel of Bast, holding the influence for healing and preservation, has its base in the heart, which is a repository for the balanced energy, which will be expressed through emotional affection. Now, let's go straight to that first. So in our article, we showed the Medutu, the Ntorot, the so-called hieroglyphs, but the Ntorot, the symbols that make up the name of the female divinity Bast. You see the unguent jar that has the sacred oil jar that has healing, oils for healing and so forth, but also for preservation. So you see that Bast, and then the loaf of bread is the T sound, so that's Bast. So sometimes she's Bast, sometimes it's Bastet, and so forth. But that is the sacred oil jar. That is the tea. That is the sacred symbol of Bast. And there are different ways, and we show one of the oil jars in the the flyer that we posted for the show. And then we show her name spelled in different ways in the Medutu. Okay, so you'll see there are different spellings, various spellings, but you will see that sacred jar, basti, salve, unguent. You'll see best, unguent, and so forth, the oil bottle and all of that. Hold on a second. Using the ceremony of the opening of the mouth and so forth. So that sacred it's not just used for mundane things, but it's also used ritually as well. And they're talking about the opening of the mouth, which we'll get into in the tree language of the Akan people. Bessin means a palm oil pot. That bessin in Akan is best in ancient Kanit and Kemet. We're talking about the same piece. And then you'll see ba, which is the term for spirit, and ba'et is the female term for spirit and so forth in the language of ancient Kemet. Now, so what's important about that is when we talk about the language and culture of Kemet, we talk about these divinities, they will identify, and they identify in the text exactly where the shrine of the divinity in the body is. So just like we are dependent physically, you're dependent on the energy of the Oriya, which is the term for sun in Akan. Without the sun, you're not going to survive. You're dependent on the Susuw, the water of the oceans and rivers and so forth. You're dependent upon Asase, the earth and all the mineral life and so forth, plant life and mineral life for, your vitamins and minerals and everything you need to survive and so forth. We're dependent on the atmosphere. We're dependent on the, magnetic pull of the moon and how it affects the rise and tides of not only the oceans on Earth, but the water in our body and so forth. So the sun, moon, planets, black substance of space, oceans, rivers, atmosphere, magnetosphere, all these features of creation we are physically dependent upon in order to survive. Our physical bodies. The spiritual forces that animate the sun and animate the moon and animate the earth mother and animate the oceans, rivers, atmosphere, black substance of space and so forth, our spirit bodies and our spiritual anatomy are dependent on these spiritual forces that animate the spiritual aspect of these different features of creation. The spiritual forces that animate the sun, animate the moon, animate the oceans, rivers, and so forth are the Abosom, as they're called in Akan, the deities, the goddesses and gods, the masculine and feminine, expansive and contractive forces in creation. They are the Orishas, they're called in Yoruba, the Vodou is called in Eve, and so forth, the Arusi, as they're called in Igbo, the various forces in creation. So there are shrines in the physical body, just like you saw with Hederu, you saw the fallopian tubes, it's a shrine that fuses together the two complementary opposites of sperm and ovum, where the shrine for Bast is the oil jar, the unguent jar. That shrine in the body for Bast is the pericardium. So let's look at what the pericardium is. Okay. So you see the fluid-filled sac that surrounds the heart. So what is the pericardium and what is that role? So there's a fluid-filled sac. The fluid-filled sac is the unguent jar of Bast. It is the oil jar. It is the thing that surrounds the heart, lubricates the heart, and so forth. That is Bast. Now, when they talk about Bast associated with fertility and love and relationships and a number of different things, this is how we're going to show and prove where she operates within the body. So when you look at a basic definition of what the pericardium is, you can see that, of course, our people were, we originated, biology and surgery, internal surgery, and so forth. So we knew anatomy, obviously. You can look at the medical papyri in ancient Kemet. We're the first ones to practice internal surgery and all these different things. So we knew which divinities were connected to different parts of the body. And it's documented in ancient Kemet. So the pericardium, double-walled sac containing the heart and the roots of the great vessels. They talk about the structure of it, the inner and outer membranes and so forth, and encloses the pericardial cavity, which contains pericardial fluid and defines the middle mediastinum. It separates the heart from interference of other structures, protects it against infection and blunt trauma, and lubricates the heart's movements. So when you look at that physiologically, it has its corollary spiritually. It is the fluid-filled sac that protects the heart, lubricates the heart. Bast, she has that fluid-filled jar, and it lubricates or protects our spiritual heart, which in ancient Kemet is called the ab and so forth. Then you look further at the definition. It separates the heart from interference of other structures, protects it against infection and blunt trauma, lubricates the heart's movements, separates it from other structures. The same thing happens with the heart when you're talking about relationships and so forth. Bast is the protective force around the spiritual heart that separates it from other structures, protects it from infection. If you didn't have that lubricated, sac surrounding the heart, yes, your body is dependent on the heart, but if it gets infected, then you fall apart. So the heart must be protected. So there's a structure around the heart that's protected and protects it against infection and blunt trauma. Bast is the force, the spiritual force, the energetic force surrounding the spiritual heart that protects it when you live in harmony with order, protects it from infection, meaning pollution from other individuals' negative projections. That negative projections, just like bacteria, free radicals are physical, entities that can invade your body and cause problems. Well, people's negative energetic projections, whether deliberate or not deliberate, become bacterial, viral agents spiritually, and you need, quote unquote, protection from that so you can repel them easily without effort and so forth. Just like you have a fluid-filled sac around the heart, you have a fluid-filled, quote unquote, sac around the spiritual heart. That's the force of the divinity Bast. And just like the planet Earth has a magnetosphere surrounding it, repelling, asteroids and other, entities that could enter into the atmosphere of Earth and destroy different parts of Earth and so forth. But the magnetosphere repels that, but can also, burn up these entities before they become dangerous to Earth and so forth. So there's a force surrounding Earth, the magnetosphere surrounding Earth, that protects the body of the planet. There's a force that surrounds your spiritual heart that protects from infection, negative projections, deliberate or not deliberate and so forth, coming from individuals or entities and so forth. So protects it against infection and lubricates the heart's movements. So the heart is moving, expanding and contracting and so forth, but it needs to be lubricated so it can continue its function. It can be established in its function, and Het Heru establishes the fusion of complementary opposites, but that needs to be perpetuated, and that lubrication process allows the heart to continue to perpetuate its natural functioning. That is the role of Bast. So you have attraction, which is Heteru. You have affection, which is Bast. So let's switch back. Okay, so let me go back up real quick. So this is why we say, let me make sure you can see this. All right. So this is why we say it is Bast through her agency and function of affection, who establishes fidelity in relationships. For fidelity is the revelation of divine affection. Bast can take the totemic form of a lioness or that of a mau or cat. She's referenced as the Arit Ra or the Eye of Ra in the ancestral cosmology. The right eye of Ra is the Aten, which is the term for sun. The left eye of Ra is the moon, which is the Yat, feminine, Ya, masculine. But she's called the Arit Abed, or the left eye of the moon. And this is why we show this lunar disk. And you know that very often you see cats and their eyes and so forth associated with the moon. In ancient Khanate Kemet, Bast is shown as a daughter of Atem, and she's the Arit Abet, or the left eye of the moon. That's what she's called in the cosmology. So this is why there's an association with moons and cats. It doesn't come from, some people try to say that came from the Greeks and so forth. But when you look at the actual text, the coffin text in ancient Kemet that go back over 4,000 years, she's referred to as Arit Abet. Abet means the, left. Abet means left, which is the left eye of the moon, which is the left eye of Ra, which is the moon. The right eye of Ra is the sun and so forth. But she's called Arit Abet, the eye left, or the left eye, meaning the lunar eye, the lunar disk. She operates through the moon and so forth. Now, so we say here in the coffin text from the Middle Empire, Bast is the firstborn daughter of the Abosom, the deity Atem, and she is our protection until the day dawns. Atem operates through the setting sun, and he governs the completion of the day and the shift from the day cycle to the night cycle. And let's just show that real quick. I'm going to show one of our books so you can see exactly who we're talking about. Okay, so this is one of the books that we published showing that Atem and Kepra in ancient Kemet is Nkwamua and Akan and Tritri and Plong and Akan. But so this is the deity Atem that the text is just talking about. And by the way, just so you may not be aware, you see these thrones in ancient Kemet, and the different colors represent different functions in creation, of course. But if you look closely, and we're not the first ones to, show this. If you look at the throne, and there are many thrones, some of them have, the sacred colors of red, black, and green that you see in the, red, black, and green flag that a number of Pan-Africanists or Black nationalists use, of course. And some of them have red and blue and white. And you'll see those in this context. And of course, if you flip this over, it's the same structure as the American flag with the square in the top and the stripes and so forth. Of course, they didn't create anything. They just stole that from, our ancient culture. But that's just an aside. So what's important, we're talking about the male divinity Atem sitting in the red setting sun and so forth. So when the sun sets in the west, the male force, the contractive force in the red setting sun that penetrates earth and goes into the underworld and so forth, that divinity is Atem. And then once the sun sets, then the moon becomes dominant and so forth. The left eye of Ra, the Arit Abet, the moon. And the daughter of Atem is Bast. She's the left eye of the moon when the sun sets. And of course, Atem, the red one, when the sun sets and goes on earth and so forth and penetrates earth, Atem is the male divinity that is on earth now. So when they say Atem or Adem or Adam was the first male on earth, and Adam in Hebrew means Adama, which means red, earth, and reddish and so forth, they stole that whole thing from the male divinity Atem, the first male divinity, quote unquote, on earth when he sets through the setting sun and sets upon the horizon. First male deity on earth who operates through the reddish sacred color and so forth. They stole that whole thing. And the wife of Atem is Kafa, which is a title of Atemet or Asase Nebetetepet. And this is where they get Eve from. So they stole the whole thing, just like all of the characters in the Bible and Quran and Talmud are fictional cartoon characters who never existed of any race or any form whatsoever. It's important. So, but let's switch back. So that's Atem. So that's what the text is actually, that's who we're referencing in the article. All right. Okay, so when we're saying here, she's the firstborn daughter of the divinity Atem, we just saw Atem. She is our protection until the day dawns. Atem operates through the setting sun. Aten, the term for sun is Aten with an N. Atem with an M. He operates through the red setting sun and so forth. He governs the completion of the day and the shift from the day cycle to the night cycle, which in turn inaugurates the dominance of the Yat, which is the moon, and then the Arit Abet, or left eye of Ra, which is, Bast. The waxing and waning of the moon visually reflects the eyes of the cat. As you can see, the pupils of the cat. So there's a physical connection, but also that cosmological connection. The magnetic force of the Yat, the moon, allows the perpetuation of the solar energy and light even through the darkness. Now, that's important because we're talking about fidelity in relationships. If you're in darkness and the moon comes forward and takes the light that's in the quote unquote underworld and reflects that in the darkness so you can find your way in the darkness, when you find your way or find yourself in the darkness of, negativity or, in the morass of certain activities and relationships and so forth, when you invoke the divinity Bast, and her shrine is in the pericardium. So when you invoke her through ritual meditation, ritual prayer, ritual chant, ritual dance, ritual song, ritual movement, whatever modality you utilize, pouring libation and so forth. But let's just say you utilize the form of Susuw, which is meditation, and invoke this divinity and so forth, and stimulate her shrine in the body, and you communicate directly with that divinity and receive that dispensation of energy to replenish your own so you can realign yourself. She can show you when you're in the darkness, she can light the proper path and illuminate the proper path while you're in darkness so you don't run into obstacles in the darkness. If it's dark in the room or dark outside, you can crash into something if you're driving. And if you're walking somewhere, you can walk into something because you can't see. But if you have a light that's reflected in the darkness. You can navigate your way through the darkness until you get to the other side, until the sun rises. So this is what Bast does for us. That's that perpetuation. So just like the sun's energy, even though in darkness, is perpetuated through the moon for the 12 hours of the night, Bast perpetuates our initiatory fusion, our balanced fusion with our complement and so forth. So even when you're going through dark, quote unquote, times, the times where you can't see the proper path, darkness in that context, then she can perpetuate the fusion. So you still stay together, even though you can't see everything that you need to see the proper path yet. So when the light comes back, you're still together. So you can make it through these quote unquote dark times. All right. So that's what we say, even when we are in times of darkness, the affection of Bast, and that's perpetuation of a fusion. The description of that perpetuation is affection. Just like the fusion of complementary opposites, that's a description, but the title, or if you want to give it a definition, the fusion of complementary opposites, you can just say attraction. If you want to say the perpetuation of that initiatory fusion of complementary opposites, you say affection. So attraction is the initiatory fusion. Affection is the perpetuation of that fusion. You don't want to just fuse together and then you just fall apart the next day. You need to keep that going. You need to keep it going, not only for yourself, but when you have children and you're bringing ancestresses and ancestors back into the world and so forth, you want to perpetuate that initiatory balanced fusion. So okay, now so we say even when we're in times of darkness, the affection of Bast, the perpetuation of divinely fused energy between us as Afurakani man and Afuraitkait woman opens the way for us to persevere. Yet the gravitational pull of the yacht, the moon, also affects the expansion or rising of the tides on Earth, as well as we said earlier, as well as the rising of the tides within our bodies. This internal increase in water through retention cools us and facilitates receptivity, intuition, and attunement spiritually. So when you see that, when you see the lunar force of Bast, we know just, studying, science and geology and everything else, that the moon causes the expansion, the bulging, the rising of the tides and so forth, affects the bodies of water on Earth. We are 70+% water, just like the Earth is 70+% water. So if it's causing the tides to rise on Earth, it's also causing the tides of water to increase within your body. What that means is when you're taking in air, of course, you're taking in moisture and so forth, and you're consuming food or liquids and so forth, you're retaining a greater degree of that moisture as opposed to, if you're working out, running, and you're burning up, that water and so forth. But if you're cool and you retain more water through, breath or movement or stillness and so forth, as well as your activities, you do certain activities to cool yourself down and retain more water, then your quote unquote tides rise. And when your tides rise and you have more water and so forth, you're more intuitive, you're more reflective, you're more internalized, you're more receptive. So invoking the feminine divinity, the female divinity, the Abosom Bast, assists in that intuition, receptivity, and so forth. Hold on a second. So now, why is that important? We say coolness lends itself to the measure of contemplation. necessary to make proper assessments, resolve conflict, and reach balanced resolutions. So when we're talking about meditation, and we utilize the term Susuw, unless I'm going to pull up this document real quick. Just so if you hadn't seen this, we went over this in a few of our lives recently. But if you hadn't seen that, I just want you to see this, these proper definitions. Okay, so in our course, and our new course is beginning next, not this Monday, not tomorrow, but next Monday, a certification course to become an instructor, a meditation instructor, a Susuw instructor. So you can become an instructor, meditation instructor certified, and you can use that certification entrepreneurially. You can go into schools or places of employment or cultural organizations or human services agencies or wherever you go, and they pay people $100, $200, $300 to conduct a 30-minute meditation session for youth to enhance outcomes, learning outcomes for people at places of work, employment, to enhance outcomes for productivity. Cultural organizations may have you come out and do a meditation session before they start their cultural program, like Kwanzaa programs, like they had Juneteenth programs or book signings or lectures or whatever it is. So we're giving people an opportunity to be certified through us, so you can have that certification as a credential and utilize that to impact the community, but also generate income for yourself. We can talk about that at the end of this live, but this is part of the initial portion of that. But the term, when we said utilizing Susuw or meditation, coolness, receptivity lends itself to the kind of contemplation necessary to resolve conflict. And that's very important. So when you see Bast operating through the left eye, the moon, the coolness, that magnetic force that cools you out, balances you out, forces you internally in a positive capacity. So you can be more receptive, more contemplative, more in tune, so you can see where discrepancies are and resolve these conflicts without things, getting hot or hostile or out of hand and so forth. Of course, we don't engage in any form of physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and so forth. That's the domain of white culture. The inferiorization of women, just like the inferiorization of men, that's white culture. That's never been part of our culture. We don't seek to inferiorize the woman in any way. We don't inferiorize men in any way. So, but when we're talking about meditation and talking about contemplation, let's look at that really quickly. We utilize the ancient term Susuw. In the Akan language, Susuw is the term for meditation, as you can see down here. To think on, to reflect upon, to consider, to meditate. But first and foremost, it means to measure. To measure, to sound, to search or measure the depth of, to calculate the capacity of, to think on, reflect upon, consider, and so forth. It's a form of measuring. You're measuring the anatomy of your spirit. When you look in the language of ancient Khanid and Kemet, Su, the root of Susuw and Akan, is a measure of length. So we're talking about measurement. You're measuring yourself. You're measuring the depth of yourself, your spirit, your spiritual anatomy, and so forth. You're calculating the capacity of your spirit, body, and so forth to see where your thoughts and intentions, which lead to actions, are coming from. Are they coming from misguided conditionings that you recently incorporated or incorporated since being a child from this perverse culture? Or are they coming from other individuals who've programmed you in a certain way, misguided information? Or are your thoughts and intentions that manifest as actions coming from your groundedness in divine order and living in harmony with the forces that govern creation and your spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors? If it's coming from there, then you live a harmonious life. If not, you need to recalibrate and purify yourself. So you measure the depth of your spirit, calculate the capacity of your spirit. That's what Susuw, to reflect upon, to meditate, to calculate, to measure. That's what meditation is. And then we show that the etymology of the English word meditate, they'll say it comes from the Proto-Indo-European root med, take appropriate measures. And even with that, they stole it from the term meh, nh-kamet, which is a cubit, the central unit of measurement. Nh and kanit and kamet. Meh or met means measurement. It became med to take appropriate measures in, English and European languages. And then the root of meditate, which means, to take appropriate measure. But when we're talking about Susuw, the ritual practice of Susuw is a ritual practice of investigating or calculating or measuring the structure of your spirit, your spiritual anatomy, the sahu, the spirit body, and how it's comprised and what's going on at that particular moment. And if you need to purify, you engage that purificatory process. And one of the ways you engage in a purificatory process is invoking the female divinity Bast. Now, okay, so we're going to switch out of that. Okay, so that's what we mean when it says the coolness lends itself to the measure of contemplation necessary to make proper assessments, resolve conflict, and reach balanced resolutions. When you understand that, then you understand the direct relationship between Bast and the perpetuation of affection, which is, if you perpetuate affection, hold on a second. Just trying to make sure you can see the whole thing in the screen. All right. If you're perpetuating, that fusion, you're maintaining the fusion and perpetuating it through time into the future and so forth. What you're doing is maintaining fidelity. If you define fidelity, that means you are bonded and you're going to maintain that bond no matter what and so forth. That's fidelity. That's a function of Bast operant with not only in creation, but in your life, even in your physical body with regard to the pericardium. As we said, that perpetuation through lubrication of the heart to make sure it continues its functioning and so forth. It maintains fidelity to the other organs and organ systems in the body. When you invoke the divinity Bast, she's the one that perpetuates natural fusion. So you're engaged in that function of fidelity just by invoking her. Now, if you look at the term root, energy, to be strong, to thrive, to succeed, to prosper, to grow, to be sound, to flourish. And you see here in the Coptic dialect, that symbol is the Coptic dialectical symbol for R. This that looks like a W is the A, and then T. So root in the ancient dialect is rot. And we show that rot in the Coptic dialect, the late period dialect of ancient Kemet. Now, let's go back up. Now, in Akan, you have the term da, to increase in quantity or number, and that's the verb, and then the noun is ada or ara, to increase in quantity or number, to multiply, to become numerous, to bring forth abundantly, to produce, attract, gather. to fill, become full, and so forth. So you have da, which is also ara. So when you have ru, which is rot in ancient Kemet, to be strong, to grow, to flourish, to succeed, to prosper, that same term, rot in Coptic, becomes ara in Akan, increasing in number, multiplying, becoming numerous, that is to flourish and so forth, to grow. This says produce or bring forth abundantly. You're constantly bringing forth and so forth. That is prosperous. You see the little symbols for growth and plant life here, the little three stems and so forth for plant life, growing, strong, flourishing, and all of that. Ra, that's ara and akan, to produce, to bring forth abundantly, and all of that. But there's a relationship between ara, to produce, to bring forth abundantly, to grow, to prosper, and the other Akan term, the same term, ara, love or affection, specifically affection. And of course, when they're translating this, when they were translating this into English, they would say, oh, well, they're trying to say love or affection. But what they're really saying in the proper context is affection, because you have the fusion, but you want it to be perpetuated. You want it to grow, to prosper, to flourish, and so forth. You don't just fuse together and then it's over. Or you have a relationship and it's over in one day. You fuse together, attraction, perpetuate that fusion, affection. Fuse together so a sperm and ovum can, a child can, be conceived. Once that zygote manifests and the spirit of the ancestor, ancestress enters into the womb and takes up residence in that zygote, it doesn't end there. Now it's time for it to expand, to flourish, to prosper, ra or ara, bring forth abundantly through cell division and so forth, perpetuation. So ara, to grow, to flourish, to bring forth abundantly, ara, affection, the perpetuation of the fusion. Now, hold on a second. So we say the term root or ra in the language of Kemet, to grow, expand, flourish, prosper, succeed, to be sound. Ara in Akan, the same thing as we said, bring forth abundantly, to grow, fill, become filled, the same term meaning affection. So we're just showing that cosmologically in the language of the Akan peoples, as well as, which includes our people who are Akan, who are forced into North America and continue the Akan tradition under the term hoodoo and so forth. We still have this as part, we use the same term that was used in ancient Kemet for that prospering, growing, abundant, and so forth, but also affection. We use the same term in the Akan tradition and ritual practice, ancestral religion as well, unbroken for thousands of years. We say when Heru fuses the Afuraka man and Afuraitkait woman together in complementary balance via attraction, that fusion is perpetuated by Bast via affection in our relationship. Our relationship grows, expands, flourishes, brings forth abundantly, becomes sound. And then if we run into issues, as we said, and we go into darkness and so forth, because we invoke this divinity, who is the Arit Abet, the left eye of Ra, meaning the moon. She can reflect the light of Ra in darkness and illuminate our path, even though we can't see the right path at that particular time. Invoking the divinity allows us to see the right path, and then we can figure out the details of why that path is right after we get on that path. But to get back on track, it's just like if you're driving a car and you veer off track, or you fall asleep and you swerve, and then you wake up, you can get back on track before something happens. So now in that context, the final thing we want to touch on here, okay, so we said when jar of Bast, we can see our complement and so forth. Now, remember, we talked about how the right eye of Ra is the Yaten, which is the sun. The left eye of Ra is the moon, the Yat, the moon. So we're talking about sight. We're not just talking about, something symbolic. We're talking about seeing and so forth, but also spiritual side as well. Clairvoyance, but also seeing, tuning to what's in harmony with order and what's out of harmony with order and all of that. So we say when our physical or spiritual sight is fixated upon our divine complement, meaning the individual that we incarnated to be with in the true sense. And of course, people can be delusional and just, they meet somebody they like and pretend like, oh, the deity said you're my divine complement. Of course, some people are delusional like that, but we're not talking about that kind of nonsense. We're talking about reality. When our physical or spiritual sight is fixated upon our divine complement, our hearts begin to swell, become full or expand. Arat, to expand, flourish, bring forth abundantly. So when you see the individual, right eye and left eye of Ra, the sun and the moon and so forth, then the heart begins to expand. So this is not just a psychological thing. There's a relationship between the sight and the heart. So let's see what that means. The heart begins to swell, become quote unquote full or expand. That's ara, full or expand. To fill, become filled, and all of that. The direct link between the eye, sight, and the heart, pericardium complex. Now, hold on a second. All right. Just trying to make sure you can see it in the screen. All right. So we say when the Abet, the left eye, Bast is the eye of the moon. And we're just coming off of this full moon. Recently, they call it a strawberry moon and so forth a couple of days ago, but we still are in that magnetic pull. Now you understand, people talk about, hey, the new moon is this and the full moon is that. The moon will affect you in general because of the magnetic pull and the effect on the tides and the effect on your body. But when we invoke Bast, this female divinity, and she has her own name in the various traditions in Yoruba, Eve, and Akan, and everything else. But when we invoke the spiritual force that animates the moon through spirit possession and spirit communication, we have a different experience. It's not just the incidental residual energy that's, projected from the moon that affects us in a magnetic way on a basic electromagnetic, foundation. We're talking about the spiritual force that animates the moon. So when she's invoked, the sacred shrine of Bast surrounding the heart is invoked, the pericardium. Her divine energy of root or ara, affection, thus manifests itself and establishes fidelity, the divine perpetuation of harmonious fusion. Our relationship thus expands, flourishes, brings forth abundantly, becomes sound. Now, some people, they can tune into something instinctively, even if you've been brainwashed your entire life with white culture and fake religion and everything else. But some people, instinctively, when they're in a situation, they will follow their instinct, even if they've been conditioned against it. Like, no, you shouldn't do that. They're like, no, I feel inside I need to do this and I'm going this direction. I don't care what you say. Some of our people naturally or instinctively, they are tuned to their natural way of life, their natural approach to ancestral religious practice, even if they've been brainwashed their entire lives with fake religion. So when they're making decisions about relationships and, and so forth, they instinctively follow what their Nsamanfo, their ancestresses and ancestors and the Abosom, the divinities, direct them to do, even if this society is telling them not to do so. So they instinctively get to Bast and they align themselves with her energy instinctively. Some of us, we would be doing that, but we've been conditioned against it. And we're told, well, you need to get with this kind of individual or this person, or you need to reject this person, whatever it is. You're with the right person. And this society says, well, no, you need to get with somebody who's, looks half white, and you need to reject the dark-skinned person, or, idiocy that we embrace, and reject the real person because we've been brainwashed. Some of us, instinctively move in the right direction. Or if there are certain other things that we've been conditioned against, we'll go in the wrong direction. But if some people just instinctively get to the right point. But as adults, we need to not just be instinctively led, we need to know exactly what we're doing. When we embrace our culture fully, we directly, deliberately, consciously seek to invoke the divinity, the force in nature that governs affection, the perpetuation of divine fusion. It makes sense as adults, if you know that's the force that governs that, then you need to invest yourself in that energy so you can perpetuate that. There's a small percentage of people who naturally get to that point instinctively. And there's a small percentage of our people who marry the right person, and their marriage lasts, and they, have children and grandchildren and so forth, and they do fine because instinctively they followed the right track, even if this culture said they should have gone in a different direction. At least momentarily, they said, no, I'm going to do what I know I need to do. But the majority of our people, we don't instinctively embrace what we should be doing. And as we can see, the majority of our marriages end in divorce, 50+% of that, even people who are together, sometimes they are cheating on each other and things like that. So we're not in a good condition as a people when it comes to marriage, relationships, fidelity, and so forth. So at some point, we need to recognize, just like with diet, you see everybody's obese and having heart disease and high blood pressure and emphysema and all these different things and diabetes. At some point, we need to say, well, we've been going through this for decades now. What diet did we have pre-embracing the standard American diet, the SAD, the SAD diet? At some point, we need to get back to natural approaches to diet so we can improve our health, or we're just going to continue to be obese and having heart disease and diabetes and everything else. And some people say, let's change. And they change their diet and change their lifestyle and, purify themselves and become healthy again. And you can see the differences between people who did that and people who continue to go along the path that our people have been going along for the past 40 or 50 or 60 years. They decided to make a change for the better. They're not polluting themselves with drugs or alcohol or, all these different kind of processed foods that have our people up in the hospitals, having all these surgeries and so forth, preventable disease. They get beyond that because they made a decision to switch, to get back to normal. We need to look at what's happened over the past 60+ years with regard to our relationships. And at some point, if you're an adult and you're mature, you're like, well, our community is suffering. Maybe we need to go back to what we were doing before we embraced white culture. And that's our ancestral religious practice, and part and parcel of that is invoking the divinity that governs the perpetuation of balanced relationships. Not going to a therapist who's trained by Europeans and telling you things that you shouldn't be engaged in and making foolish decisions. Our ancestresses and ancestors established a culture. There are priests and priestesses and elders and elderesses within the cultural structure that function as actual counselors in the real sense. So you can compare that to the nonsense that we learn when we go and get degrees in psychology and, become psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists and so forth, as opposed to the actual priests and priestesses and elders and elderesses who are rooted in a real tradition. So we say, well, this reality has been a central component of our lived experience and thus woven into the fabric of our cosmology for thousands of years. It's only recently that Westerners have discovered, quote unquote, a biological basis for this dynamic. Now, we talked about 4,000 years ago in the text of Kemet, Bast, the daughter of Atem. Atem is through the red setting sun. So the force that governs the red setting sun is Atem. The sun sets in the west, his daughter. So when the sun sets in the west and then you see the moon come forward, Atem sets in the west and goes into the underworld. And then his daughter comes up in the moon and she's the left eye of Ra. So she's the left eye, Arit, Abet. Arit meaning eye, Abet meaning left eye of Ra, and so forth. She's the moon. Operant within that lunar orb and so forth, and uses the lunar orb, the yacht, the lunar orb, to transmit her energy. She's within the pericardium, the oil jar, the sacred unguent jar, the sacred Bast jar that has the oil that lubricates the heart and so forth. She's the pericardium, stabilizes the heart, protects it from infection, protects it from blunt trauma, protects it from other structures and so forth, so it can perpetuate its function. So we have that entire cosmology woven into our culture for thousands of years. Language, culture, cosmology, and so forth. Now the Westerners come along. Is there a relationship between the eye and sight and the heart? So if you look at this, it has been documented that those in a relationship simply by, hold on a second, simply by staring at one another, and we're talking about a balanced, a real relationship, can cause their heartbeats to synchronize with one another. There's a direct connection between the functions of the eye and the heart for bonding and perpetuating bonding. This is because there's a direct connection between Bast as the Arit Ra, the eye of Ra, through the Yat, through the moon, and the energy of the spiritual Ab, or the heart pericardium complex. Hold on. So we talk about when we invoke Bast in the context of ancestral ritual on a consistent basis, we avail ourselves of the fullness of her energy. And when we talk about consistency, it is no different than building your spiritual muscle, so to speak, is no different than building your physical muscle. If you go to the health club on a consistent basis, then you're going to grow and you're going to develop and you're going to grow in strength and everything else. If you go once on a Monday, you go back on a Friday, and then you go back on a Tuesday, and you go back again 2 weeks later, I mean, you're going to exercise your muscles, but you're not going to grow, you're not going to develop, you're not going to get stronger and so forth. Same thing with engaging in meditation. You begin to deepen your receptivity, deepen your connection to the forces in creation, deepen your connection, your receptivity to the insurmountable, so you can hear them clearly, feel them, experience them on a spiritual level and so forth. Clairvoyance becomes more prominent, clairaudience, clairgustance, and the various forms of expression. So we're talking about consistency in that context. So on a consistent basis, going to your ancestral shrine on a consistent basis, engaging in Susuw meditation on a consistent basis, ritual song or ritual dance or ritual chant or ritual movement or ritual prayer, or ritual, in our ancestral languages, or, ritual meditation, Susuw, whichever main modality or combination thereof that you are more drawn to, on a consistent basis, we avail ourselves of the fullness of her energy. The same with other Abosom divinities as well, but we're talking about her. So when an Afuraka man, African man, invokes Bast via ritual, her shrine within his body, the shrine encasing the heart, pericardium, the oil jar, is replenished. When he sees or contemplates his divine complement, he experiences his heart expanding, swelling. He experiences the aura, the expansion, the swelling, the flourishing, and all that. They just recently, a few years ago, were able to prove that, quote unquote, scientifically, but we have that in the cosmos. Of course, we experience that. To say, oh, you see the person, your compliment, and your heart swells, but we've always had that in the cosmology, and of course, there's a biological basis for that. So then we say his attraction for her, initiated by Het Heru, initiation, is perpetuated via the expansive energy, the affection of Bast. This affection thus establishes fidelity permanently for no matter where or when he sees any other woman, no matter how beautiful, energetic, or magnetic, and so forth. Bast will reveal to him how none can compare to the true divine complement. So once again, when we talk about fidelity, not just the perpetuation of relationship, but it's very easy to not cheat on someone when you're focused. It's very simple. It's not hard at all. So when people say, I'm just human and that's why I cheated, there's a difference between, manhood or adulthood, womanhood, adulthood, and childhood. And it just depends on what hood you want to live in. Are you going to live in childhood or adulthood? If you're living in adulthood, it's not hard at all to maintain fidelity. And we're showing you the mechanics of fidelity through the invocation of the divinity that governs fidelity in creation on earth and so forth. She's within the core of earth and so forth. You'll see, just like you have Ptah and Sekhmet and Nefertim as a triad, you also have Ptah and Bast and Mahes, the lion-headed divinity, as a triad as well. And Ptah is deep within the core of earth, and that outer core, you have Bast in the context of that outer core. So just like you have the heart and then the core that surrounds it, which is the fluid-filled sac on earth, in earth, you have the core, then you have the inner core, inner core, and so forth, and then you have the outer core, and then you have the mantle and lower mantle, lower crust, upper crust, and all that. But you have the core, and then you have the outer fluid core. In fact, let's just look at that real quick. Just so you know exactly what we're talking about. In fact, let me see. So this is the divinity Ptah, but you will see, let me give you a bigger, okay, this is a better picture right here. Okay, this is Ptah. Let me make sure you can see that on the screen. All right. Okay, so this is the divinity Ptah. You see him in his shrine, in his pavilion, and he's mummified and so forth. He is the force on the masculine side that's deep within the inner core of earth. They call him the divine architect, the divine craftsman and so forth, turning in the core of earth and so forth, constantly crafting or fashioning the form that's going to become maintained as the surface of earth. Ptah is deep within the core. The inner core of earth, that spiritual force is Ptah. But then you have the core on the outside, that fluid core on the outside and so forth. That is sanctuary of Bast. Let's look at the just so you can see a visual representation of that. Give you a better one. Okay, this is a better image right here. So you can always show the shrines of these divinities. You can show them in the body, you can show them on earth, and then you can show them spiritually. So looking at the structure of earth and so forth. When they talk about Ptah, the first male divinity, first sovereign of earth and so forth, and then he passed, the kingship passed from Ptah to Atem, and then Atem to Shu, and Shu to Geb, and Geb to Asar and so forth. Look at the inner core, and then the, lower mantle and upper mantle and crust and the black soil and so forth. You'll see Ptah and Atem and Shu and Geb and Asar in succession. So you have, the lower mantle is Atem and the upper mantle is Shu and the crust is Geb and the black soil on top of the crust is Asar. You see the transition of leadership on the masculine side. Same thing on the feminine side with, Sechima and Sekhmet, and, you have Asasi Nebet Tepet, the wife of Atem, and, Shu and Tefnut within the mantle and so forth. And Shu and Tefnut give birth to Geb and Nut, which is the earth's crust in the sky. And Geb and Nut give birth to Asar, Aset, Set, and Nebuchadnezzar, 2 sets of twins. The black soil substance and the river waters, Asar and Aset. The red soil substance, including the desert and red clay, and the rain waters of earth, which is Set and Nebuchadnezzar. So you have this family, this lineage, this blood circle going from the inner core to the outer. So when they talk about the kingship of earth passing from Ptah through to Asar, the development of earth from the inner core to the outer core and the upper crust, you find that. But you have the Ptah in the inner core, and then you have the outer core, and part of that is a fluid outer core. You got the heart and the pericardium surrounding the heart. So you have Ptah and Bast working together. But let's just jump right back on the other part. Okay, so when we said his attraction for her, so we said it's, once you're connected with the person who's the divine complement and so forth, and then that connection is perpetuated through Bast and so forth when you invoke her, and that's part of our ritual practice. When we pour in libation, engage in ritual prayer. Bast, of course, is one of the divinities that we invoke every time we pour libation, every time we engage in ritual prayer and so forth. And when it's time, when you're constantly invoking certain divinities through ritual prayer, through libation on a regular basis, when it's time to address the issue that they happen to govern, you're so accustomed to invoking them anyway that they're very close by. Their energy is very close and, a way to touch and receive and align yourself with it because you're constantly invoking them. So, and you're more receptive then. Now, hold on 1 second. Okay, so we say that, of course, when you do that, and it's the same for men and women, but it says no other woman's energy, if you're with the person you're with, and it's the same with the woman, with men, and so forth, no other person's energy will be able to match the frequency of expansion operant within the physical and spiritual heart and pericardium when you compliment the person you're with, or when you contemplate, the person you're with. So if you're an Afuraitkait man, you're with your divine complement, the Afuraitkait woman. When you invoke Bast on a regular basis, no other woman's energy is going to complement the energy of the divine complement because, you're naturally bonded and so forth, and that bond was perpetuated through affection, and you'll be able to experience that, and nobody else will be able to match that. And the flip side is always also true as well. For the Afuraitkait woman, when you're with the Afuraitkait man you need to be with and so forth, no other male's energy operant through the spiritual heart and physical heart, through the spiritual pericardium and physical pericardium, will align with yours except for the person that you should be with. So, now, and we say it's because the Afuraitkait woman, who is his divine complement, was brought to him by Het Heru, the divinity of beauty herself, and the union perpetuated by Bast, the divinity of fidelity. And the flip side is also true. The Afuraitkait woman, the man, was brought to her by Het Heru and perpetuated by Bast and so forth. So we say it's therefore effortless for us to reject any thought or act of infidelity, no matter the circumstances. So it's not hard at all to maintain fidelity and so forth. Now, we say the keys to permanent balanced relationships, marriages, have always been present within our Afuraitkait, African ancestral religion and culture. We need only to avail ourselves of its wisdom. So when we talk about these kinds of situations, and hold on 1 second. We quoted from an article in National Geographic talking about synced heartbeats, the discovery that people's hearts are can harmonize solely on visual or auditory information reinforces a law of nature. According to this individual, a psychologist at the University of Cincinnati in Ohio, the natural law of coupled oscillators holds that when two or more rhythms meet, they will become coordinated, a phenomenon seen across the natural world, from fireflies matching their flashes to groups falling into step. So they're just talking about the scientific basis for seeing, on one hand, the divine complement, and then the hearts being affected by that. As we say, that was already in our culture, fully incorporated in ritual, language, and cosmology thousands of years ago. So we've always known this. If you're dealing with relationships and we're looking from our ancestral religious grounded perspective, you're trying to figure out, attraction and fidelity and so forth, the Cherapit or Cherep or Cherapit, which is a title of priest and priestess in ancient Kemet, Cherep and Cherepit, male and female priest or priestess, a certain class. Cherepit was corrupted into Cherapi or therapy, and then the therapist and so forth. But that's a corruption of a title of a class of priests and priestesses in ancient Kemet. So if you went to a traditional Cherapit or Cherep, traditional priest or priestess in our ancestral language and culture, and we're talking about relationship to fidelity, they would direct you, you're out of alignment with the divinity Bast. Invoke Bast, give certain ritual offerings, engage in ritual meditation or ritual chant or ritual song with the divinity Bast, so you can realign with this force in creation, receive her dispensation of energy, realign yourself with that, and purify and reconnect yourself. You go to a European therapist or someone Black who's been trained, in a university based on European foolish concepts of therapy, then they're going to tell you, they're going to sit there and talk to you and ask you about what relationships you have with your parents, or maybe you are still not overcoming your inner child and all kinds of nonsense, as opposed to the actual force in nature that governs affection or fidelity that you're out of harmony with. And once you realign yourself ritually with the force that regulates fidelity, then you can easily embrace fidelity. They don't have the capacity to even conceive of that. So we're wasting a lot of time. So okay, so we had a couple of articles, University of California, as well as the University of, in Ohio and so forth, talking about these different things. We just link them just to show that they're just discovering what we've already known. So, okay, but that's the cosmological information we wanted to share today about that, that topic. And let me see. Just want to see if there are any questions in the chat room we might have missed. Okay, yeah, I'll say we appreciate that. Appreciate those comments. Question: dating has become corrupted by the whites. How can we correct this to get back into alignment and have balanced relationships? Dating has become very difficult for young men. How can we overcome this? So part of that is, on one hand, self-purification. And if you think about, we always use this example, and they even kind of talked about it in that particular article. They even touched on it. If you have a tuning fork, you can make a tuning fork oscillate and so forth and vibrate. If you have a tuning fork and you make it oscillate, and then you put another tuning fork near it, that one will begin to oscillate at the same frequency as this one. They begin to align with one another. All it takes is the first one to begin is sending vibrations out. You put another tuning fork near it, it captures those vibrations and begins to oscillate or vibrate at the same rate. When you start engaging in ritual purification and doing what you need to do spiritually and so forth, you're vibrating at a certain frequency, then the person that you need to be with is going to be stimulated wherever they are, and they're going to start oscillating at that frequency as well. If they are even just a little bit in tune, they'll be pushed to begin to engage in some kind of ritual practice or reflective practice, or figuring out, hey, something is going on, I need to start investigating something spiritually, and they'll put themselves in position. They'll be pushed by their Nkwamua ancestresses and ancestors across your path. Also, sometimes, there may be a situation where maybe people are already engaged in some form of that. Some people are with the wrong individual, say they're with the wrong individual, they figure that out, and they go through a divorce process. And while they're going through the divorce process, they apply for a job in another state. And then after a couple of months, that job replies to them and says, they like to get an interview, and they go out for the interview, and, they impress them and they get the job. And then about a month later, after they resign from this place, then they, relocate to the other state and so forth. And, after a 3 or 4 month process from the first time they applied to now, they were able to get to that state and start that new job. And they may meet the person that becomes their spouse at that new place. The person who became their spouse, maybe 5 months before that, they were engaged in ritual, practice to align them, purify themselves, but also align themselves with who they needed to be with. And they may have been thinking, man, I'm doing this ritual practice and purification, and I still haven't met my person. Actually, the person was already in the process of completing the divorce, getting the job in your state, getting ready to move. They didn't even know they were going to get a call back from that place. They got a call back a few months later, went for the interview, all these different things. They were already being moved for you all to connect, 5 months ago. So you may have been thinking for the next 4 months or so that nothing was happening, but something was happening the entire time. So you may have been like, well, maybe, this isn't working, and so to speak. Sometimes people are finishing up from a relationship they should not be in, or they just may not be in a relationship at all, but they weren't focused on anything. It doesn't mean nothing is happening. So, but the key is engaging in our ancestral culture has the answers to, the questions. Our ritual practices are the answers to the questions that we have. All right. Okay, we appreciate that comment. Yet I'll say, said lust destroys relationships. People are sometimes with their divine complement and let lust destroy the relationship by cheating and doing all kinds of lustful and promiscuous activities. That does happen, and there's a such thing. If you look in the Akan language, for example, the term awadiye. Awadiye is the term for the ritual of marriage. Awadiye, and then you have awadiye gu. Gu means to annul or bring to an end. Awadiye gu means to bring to an end. Gu awadiye, or the marriage and so forth. There's the concept of divorce in ancestral culture and religion, just like there's the concept of marriage, and we established that first before any other groups of people were on the planet. Just because you're engaged in the right, thing, you have to, see if you're really engaged in that. But if you're on the right path, sometimes people will be on the right path for a while and they decide they're not going to do that anymore. Some people don't want to continue. Some people fall into European culture and get drugged back in, just like somebody who, they may have got hooked on drugs and so forth, and somebody else did the same thing. And some people say, I'm tired of going through this, and they check themselves into rehab, or they do whatever they need to do to get clean, and they never go back. And some other people, they get clean for a period, for a number of years, but they decide to go back. Now, the person who's cleaned themselves up, they're not going to ever go back. So sometimes if that happens, then there has to be a separation. they were on the right track for a minute, but if they go back and they're not interested in really cleaning themselves up, then the separation does have to take place. Sometimes that happens culturally as well. Some people are on the same page culturally, but some people decide that they want to go back and they don't want to continue along on that path. So that does take place. But we would say typically for people who are really, have fidelity even to the culture itself, and they are serious about that, most of the time, people who are serious about culture, 99% of the time, they don't look up 10 years later and they're back, engaging in drug use or straightening out their hair and interracialism and so forth, and they were Afrocentric for a year or two and then they fell off. People who are not serious, they'll pretend to be Afrocentric or African-centered or cultural and so forth, just as a defense mechanism, because deep down inside, they really wanted acceptance from our enemies, the whites and our offspring. But some people are not. The people who are serious, once they switch, they don't switch back. But some people change their diet and they become healthy and they lose weight and they, overcome type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure and these things. They don't all of a sudden go back and, gain 50 pounds and reject all of that healthy living just to go back to the state that they were in previously. Most people, 99% of the time, when they get on that health track, this is their lifestyle from that point on. This culture likes to promote those who were never serious in the first place, that less than 1%. They'll promote them on television shows and movies and online and so forth as representative of everybody. So if you see somebody who's Afrocentric, African-centered, culturally grounded and so forth, your idea is, deep down inside, they really just want white acceptance. So they're going to drop all that and have a white girl in 5 years. They want people to believe that, so we will never embrace our culture. That's a tactic that the whites and their offspring have always used to try to destroy a cultural movement, but they can't do so. Okay, so as we said earlier, not this Monday, but next Monday, we're starting our 4-week course, the Susuw course. We're already engaged in one 4-week course, but the new one is going to start, certification course, the new one is going to start next Monday on July 1st. It's a 4-week course to become certified as a meditation instructor, a Susuw instructor. You have that certification. You can utilize it to go into, places of employment, schools, cultural organizations, community organizations, cultural events, wherever you are, and you can become entrepreneurial in the context of people will pay. They typically pay $100, $200, $300 for somebody to come out and conduct sessions either once a week or once a month or once every other week or maybe a few days in a row. They're using that in not just independent schools or charter schools, but even regular schools, because they noticed that meditation for 10 minutes or so at the beginning of the day after the first bell gets the students focused, and they're more focused throughout the course of the morning. And then they go out for lunch and recess and all that. They come back, meditation for 10 minutes or so before they start the second half of the day. They're more focused. It enhances learning outcomes. They've done many studies on that over the years, and many people have incorporated that. And they're not doing it from a spiritual perspective. They're doing it to enhance learning outcomes. Many employers will bring people out for seminars to enhance productivity at work, and they'll pay you to come out $200, $300, or $400 to conduct a session with employees and so forth, because it benefits their business. It enhances work outcomes and everything else. Some people to reduce stress and anxiety, or dealing with weight loss and so forth. People at homeless shelters or women's family shelters and so forth, or a number of different human services agencies and so forth. And people have group therapy, group meditation, drug rehab, all kinds of things. People bring people out because these things are more effective than the things that they've used in the past. So many of them require some form of credential in order to pay you or, take your invoice and so forth. This is why we have the certification course. We've been engaged in Susuw meditation for the past 30 years. We first published on it 20 years ago, and we've been teaching on that for the past 20 years. One of the books we'll utilize is our Nkwamua Whole Life Journal, as you can see here. Another one of the books is the Pata Sasa Tem. Another one is Ankh, the origin of the term yoga, Karakasa, the origin and nature of the chakra, and so forth. So we go into detail of all that information. So if you would like to sign up for the certification course to become a certified Susuw instructor, meditation instructor, go to the page. We do have a split payment option also, so you can make a down payment just so you can register. And you can make the down payment today, and then you can pay the other part, the following week and a half after that. So, and in fact, let me show that the Susuw page on the website. You see on our website, Odwirafo.com, the Susuw page. When you Google that, even if you Google Odwirafo and Susuw, you will see that. But we'll have it in the description box for this video as well. Okay. So let me know if there are any other questions. If not, we're going to go ahead and end it. Okay. Okay, so Yedase, we thank everybody for jumping on this live. We just wanted to, bring forward some information that's always been part of our culture for thousands of years. Everything that we have within our culture, all that we need to overcome any obstacle, to meet any, conflict, meet any question that we have. When we talk about fidelity, we talk about relationships and so forth, and meditation associated with that to, increase and preserve fidelity in relationships. It all revolves around the female divinity Bast. And we get into some more detail about that in some of our courses and, books and so forth, where we talk about ritual practice. And we get into that ritual practice in the instructor certification course as well, step by step, how to practice that meditative practice and these invocations and all of that. All right. Okay, so Yedase, we thank you all for joining, and Yebeshabio, we will meet again.